Yes, sir, you are.
Yes,
Okay, thank you so much. Behind every crime lies not just an act, but a mind, a labyrinth of psychopathology waiting to be understood. Crime does not always begin with intent. Often, it begins with the shadows of the human psyche. And to understand crime without studying psychopathology is to read the story without understanding its author. Good evening, everyone. I, Swapnil, warmly welcome all of you on behalf of Forensic Fusion to today's much awaited one day international workshop on Mindhunter, the psychology of crime. But before we start the session, I would like to take a minute to briefly introduce the organization. Forensic Fusion is a forward thinking forensic education platform registered with the MSME Government of India. It offers free and accessible forensic science education to students, professionals, and enthusiasts, fostering a vibrant learning community. Through its diverse offerings, including specialized courses, immersive internships, expert led webinars, interactive workshops, distinguished guest lectures, and stimulating competitions, Forensic Fusion provides a dynamic platform for students and professionals to explore the intricacies of forensic science. Additionally, the organization enriches its online presence through thought provoking case studies and insightful articles featured on its website, as well as educational videos on its official YouTube channel, further enhancing the learning experience. Crime is not merely a violation of law, but often a window into the complexities of the human mind. In today's session, we step beyond statistics and case files into the psychological undercurrents of crime to understand how the mind and the law collide in shaping the narratives of justice. Today, we are truly privileged to have with us an exceptional expert whose work lies at the very heart of forensic science and criminal investigation. It is my absolute honor to introduce Ms. Alaa El Sheikh, a distinguished forensic scientist from Lebanon whose journey is a perfect blend of work experience, field experience, academic expertise, and a deep understanding of the criminal mind. Ms. Alaa brings with her hands on experience with the Lebanese Internal Security Forces, where she has actively worked on fingerprint analysis, evidence collection, and real world criminal investigation. This is not just theoretical knowledge, but this is forensic science practiced where it truly matters. At crime scenes, where every detail can change the course of justice. What makes her presence even more special for us is her continued association with our platform since 2024. She has consistently delivered power packed, insightful sessions covering domains such as forensic psychology, bloodstain pattern analysis, and forensic anthropology, and has led multiple successful trainings and workshops with Forensic Fusion, each one leaving a lasting impact on the learners. Currently, she is serving as an academic advisor and instructor in Forensic Fusion and an instructor at the Elathia Academy in Lebanon, where she continues to monitor and shape aspiring forensic professionals, bridging the gap between global perspectives into forensic education. And today she brings to us a session that is as intriguing as it is powerful: Mindhunter, the psychology of crime. This is not just a topic, it's an exploration into the dark, complex, and often misunderstood workings of the criminal mind. A journey into the understanding of what drives individuals to commit crimes, how patterns of behaviors emerge, and how psychology becomes a crucial tool into decoding criminal intent. So get ready for a session that promises to be thought provoking, intense, and intellectually enriching. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome and enthusiastic welcome to our esteemed guest speaker, Miss Alaa El Sheikh. Ma'am, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, ma'am, you're
Yes,
audible.
ma'am.
Thank you so much for this warm presentation, Mr. Swapnil. Allow me to thank you for having me in this, in Forensic Fusion and for this opportunity. And I'm really glad to be part of it. And thank you for everyone who joined the session today. And I'm sorry for the late. I was having a technical issue. And let me just share my screen. Hold on a second. Mm. Guys, can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So today we are going to explore something very interesting, not just crime itself, but the psychology behind it. You know, we often hear about crimes in the news, we see them in movies, but we rarely stop and ask, why does someone commit a crime? This is where forensic psychology comes in. It helps us understand human behavior in legal context, not to excuse crime, but in order to understand in a deeper scientific way. So today, in this presentation, we are going to move step by step. We'll start by understanding what forensic psychology actually is, and then we'll look into how someone can enter this field, especially in India. After that, we'll explore criminal behavior, what influenced it, how it is developed, to talk about then serial killers, and I will end with how forensic psychology can actually help our society and how it's usually presented in the media versus in reality. So I wanted to start with this quote, which is, the truth is rarely pure and never simple. And this is very important in forensic psychology. When we talk or when we look at a crime, it's rarely a simple story of good and bad. You know, there are often multiple factors: psychological, social, biological. They are all interacting together. So instead of like jumping to conclusions, forensic psychology teaches us to slow down, analyze carefully, and understand complexity. First thing first, before we talk about forensic psychology, we must understand forensics itself. Forensics refers to the application of scientific knowledge to legal questions, and the word comes from the Latin forensis, meaning the forum, basically where legal matters were discussed publicly. And forensics also is not a single science. It's a framework where different sciences are used in order to assist the justice system in understanding the facts, events, causes, and responsibilities. For example, of forensic science, it includes forensic medicine, forensic biology, anthropology, chemistry, forensic psychology as well. So the key idea here is that forensics support legal decision-making, but does not replace the judge, the courts, or the law. And it's also important to note that forensics is about evidence and interpretation. It's not about the punishments or the verdicts. For example, a forensic doctor explains the cause of death. They do not tell if someone is guilty. A forensic psychologist explains the mental functioning. Also, they cannot decide the guilt. Now, what is psychology? Psychology is the scientific study of behavior, thoughts, emotions, the decision-making, and the memory and perception. And basically, psychology aims to understand how humans think and act in normal and abnormal way. And psychology also includes many fields like clinical psychology, cognitive psychology, social psychology, and the abnormal one. On its own, psychology is not legal and not forensic. It explains only the behavior, but it does not judge it. So psychology basically works with probabilities and patterns. It's not certainties, okay? And it can explain, for example, why stress can affect a memory when it comes to the witnesses. You know, we cannot always rely to the witness only as an evidence, because sometimes it can be affected if the witness was in a lot of pressure or a lot of stress. We cannot really take into consideration its memory because it can be affected by that. So we cannot say, or we cannot like talk only about who's guilty based on the witness himself. So now that we talked about forensics by its own and psychology by its own, we can understand that forensic psychology exists only when psychology enters a legal context. And this, it's basically the application of psychological knowledge into courts, criminal investigations, prisons, rehabilitation and reintegration programs, and of course, legal decision-making processes. So forensic psychology does not work independently. It works within the limits of the legal system. And there's, of course, some small differences that you should know to terms. Like, for example, when we say clinical psychology, we're talking about the focus, it should be more on the treatment and the therapy. When we talk about criminal psychology, we are studying the behavior theoretically. But when we talk about forensic psychology, we are basically applying all of this knowledge that we have when it comes to the criminal behavior, to the witness behavior, victim behavior, and everything. We're applying that into legal questions. So its core role is to assist the justice system in understanding mental functioning and behavior. We do not decide the outcomes. Is everything clear up till now? Do you have any question? I cannot see the chat, so if someone can say by the mic. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am, you're audible.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think there are no questions yet because the chats are clear.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we're gonna talk about a brief history of forensic psychology. Well, you know that forensic psychology didn't appear suddenly. It was developed because the legal system needed help to understand the human behavior. So in the early 90s, I want to say, psychologists began questioning things like, are witnesses reliable? Can memory be trusted? Can people be actually influenced during questioning? So one of the earliest contributors was Hugo in 1908, who argued that psychology could improve legal processes, especially testimony. And in 1917 and 1922, William Moulton Marston also developed some early deception detection method, which basically after that contributed to the modern polygraph. If you don't know, the polygraph is that instrument that they say that it is used to detect if someone is lying, but basically it's not like that. It's not how it works. This machine doesn't work on detection of the lies. Basically, it detects if someone is they actually detect the stress, the being nervous or something like that. Like for example, it cannot be actually relied on because sometimes someone who is not guilty can be so stressed and nervous, and during like the examination, if he's put into the polygraph, it can show that he's lying, whereas he's not. He's just nervous, so it's not like 100% accurate. So back to our initial thought, we were saying that William Moulton Marston developed this method, and he also became one of the first teaching members in the American University. Also, in 1921, there is a psychologist who testified in court for the first time, okay, regarding some kind of case. And this was a major step because it showed that psychological expertise could be used legally. And then after that, we have in 1931, where Howard Burt actually published a textbook dedicated to forensic psychology. And in 1968, Martin Razor became the first police psychologist in the Los Angeles Police Department. And finally, in 2001, forensic psychology was officially recognized as a professional specialty. Okay, so you should know that this field grew because law needed help answering questions. That means that in history, okay, there were always some cases where they could not understand, like, why is this criminal doing this? How is he acting like that? So sometimes they needed someone, an expert, to talk more about the psychology of this person. And even more, there are some people who, you know, can claim that they are insane in order to not go to the prison, in order to get like a lower, I guess, like a lower punishment. And sometimes they are lying, so they need the presence of a psychologist to assess this person and know are they really sick or they are pretending to be sick? And also, it was developed to protect the justice and not to defend the criminals, because there are some people that think, oh, okay, so we have right now psychologists in courts. So you're saying that we are not trying to punish the criminals and we just want to, like, like give them a low punishment, which is not true. Basically, you guys know that there are some people who can actually be sick. Some people who have, for example, psychosis. They basically see some kind of hallucinations. They were not conscious when they did the crime. So when we face people like this, we cannot actually put them in prison. They need to be treated in a certain way, because if they're not treated, their situation is gonna get worse. They might try to hurt themselves in the prison or hurt the others, or even when they go out of prison, they will probably and most likely commit another crime. So that's why we talk about rehabilitation more. Even though, like, let's say this criminal is not like mentally sick and he just committed a crime, we should have some kind of rehabilitation center to the people, to the prisoners already existing there, because when they come out to the society, they need to start to have this fresh start. We don't want them to go crime, so we need to help them. And basically, that's how we are protecting the society. That's how we're protecting the justice, and we are not defending the criminals. Now, is forensic psychology applied in India? So we understood what forensic psychology is. So is it applied in India? Well, forensic psychology does exist and is used, but it's still a developing field compared to other countries, just like the same in Lebanon. It's the same thing. It's still developing. So it's applied in areas like criminal investigations, court evaluation, forensic laboratories, and sometimes in prison or rehabilitation programs. However, the system is not always fully structured. This means that there are fewer specialized roles, and sometimes we do not actually rely on them. But this also means something important, that you should know that this field is growing and there is a room always for development and opportunity. How can someone become a forensic psychologist? If someone is interested in this field, the path is quite structured academically, but it's more flexible in practice. So you usually start with a bachelor degree in psychology. This, of course, gives you the foundation, understanding the behavior, the emotions, the mental process, and everything. Then you move to a master's degree, ideally in forensic psychology if it's available. If it's not, for example, in Lebanon, we don't have master degree in forensic psychology, so we have to go for applied psychology or clinical psychology. After that, you're going to have some practical training and internships. It means more like you're going to have some practical, like you can work with some organizations or NGOs. You can have some internships. Maybe if there's some kind of program like working in prison for rehabilitation, because this field especially, it cannot be learned only from books, okay? And of course, it depends actually on your interest as well. Like you can choose your direction. If it's more research, you want a legal consulting or clinical work, okay? And if you want to work clinically, like by clinically, I mean like diagnosing and treatment, you need like more additional, of course, certifications. Now, what does a forensic psychologist do? Let's clarify something very important, like what they do and they do not do. Basically, they assess, analyze, and they interpret behavior in legal context. So basically, they can evaluate a person's mental state, they assess the risk of violence, they help in the rehabilitation program, and they provide expert opinions in court. But definitely, there are some things that they do not do. For example, they cannot arrest people, they cannot interrogate like the police, and they cannot decide the guilt of or innocence of a person. So because that is the role of law enforcement and the court. They only assess when it comes to the behavior in legal context. For example, a forensic psychologist might say that this individual shows some signs of impulsivity and they have this lack of empathy. But they cannot say that this person is guilty. They don't know that. You cannot, based on the psychology, tell if someone is guilty or innocent. So they explain behavior and they do not judge it legally. Now, criminal behavior. When we talk about criminal behavior, it's very important to understand that it is rarely caused by a single factor, okay? Instead, it's the result of multiple influences interacting together. So we have some biological factors. When I say biological factors, I mean some physical and neurological characteristics that may actually influence the behavior, but they do not determine if a person can commit the crime or not. They simply can create a potential of vulnerability for this person. And some of these biological factors can be, first thing, genetics. Because some studies suggested that certain inherited traits like aggression, for example, may increase the likelihood of having this antisocial behavior who can actually be a not very straightforward reason for a person to commit a crime, but basically it can affect the behavior of this person. Second, we have the brain structure and function. So you know that there are some areas in the brain that are involved in the decision making and the impulse control, and basically it's the prefrontal cortex. It actually affects how a person regulates their behavior. And if it's like damaged, or we have like, for example, injured, someone is injured and it was damaged, it can actually affect the part of decision making and the impulse control. And also some, if there's like some imbalances in neurotransmitters, like, you know, the serotonin or the dopamine, it can influence the aggression, the mood regulation, as well as some hormonal influences. And as I said, also brain injuries, like the ones affecting the frontal lobes, they can impair the judgment and the impulse control. Also, we have psychological factors, like, for example, the personality. And we have social environment or social factors, like the environment or the peer influence, like how this person grew up, where they grew up, how was their relationship with their family, their friends. You know, some people who live, like, let's say in a neighborhood that where violence is very high, they are most likely to be like influenced by that. Okay, so the environment can actually influence a behavior. And of course, life experiences, like if they have some kind of trauma, for example, like child abuse or anything like that. But of course, that does not mean that any person who went through an abuse when they were children, they're gonna become criminals. That's not it. There's basically a lot of factors and a lot of tendencies that a person can have that differs from a person to another. So the crime, we can understand, it's not something that comes from one cause. It's a combination of a lot of things. Now I'm going to talk about nature versus nurture. So it's one of the most important concepts in psychology. This concept tries to answer a very simple question, but it is actually powerful. Like, are people born the way that they are, or they are shaped by their environment? Can someone actually answer me this question? Can you guys tell me if people are born this way, the way that they are, or they are shaped to be, for example, criminals because of their environment?
Ma'am, I believe that
Yeah.
Ma'am, as per my belief, due to the environment, a person's perspective might be changed.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I also think that a person's behavior is shaped by his environment.
Okay. Is there someone else who'd like also to talk about this before we dig into it?
I think
Yes,
that
ma'am.
both
I
play a
also
role.
think
Sorry, I didn't hear you. You think what?
I think both play a role equally because a person's upbringing equally matters along with the environment on how they are. The upbringing sets the main foundation of their values, their skill sets, their deep rooted beliefs that forms them as a person who they are. Whereas the environment would in turn either change them or might either reinforce them to do the same behavior as they are currently.
Okay. Okay.
I also think different types of effects are there, such as if a child born with a problem and then the environment also affects its mental conditions and retard its mental condition, then he or she can be a more dangerous criminal than normal one.
Okay. Allow me, guys, to thank you for your participation, and you are all right. How is that? Let me explain what is nature. Basically, when we say nature, we're referring to everything like a person is born with. And this includes the genes, the brain structure, and the biological traits. So nature is about more of biological influences. You know, some people are naturally more aggressive, impulsive, or emotionally reactive. And these tendencies can come from genetics or brain functioning. Whereas, what is nurture? Basically, it refers to everything you experience in life, and this includes family environment, education, culture, trauma, also social influences. So, nurture is about environmental influences. For example, a child who grows up in a violent household or a supportive family will develop very differently. So the most important idea here is that in modern psychology, we don't say nature or nurture. We say nature and nurture because they interact together. Two people, for example, they both have impulsive traits, okay? But one grows up in a stable environment, so he learned how to control like some these impulsive traits. However, the other one grows up in chaos, so he developed, for example, a criminal behavior. So this example shows that these two people, they have the same biology, but it turns out different outcomes. So in forensic psychology, this concept help us understand crimes better. So instead of asking, is this person born bad, we ask, what biological and environmental factors combined to produce this behavior? So nature create the potential and nurture, shapes it. And also there are some situations that can trigger it as well. Now, let's talk about psychopathy versus sociopathy. You ever heard of these two, like when you call someone a psychopath or a sociopath? Have you heard of these terms before?
I've heard about psychopath in movies,
Okay,
in dramas.
yeah. Do you know
Psychopath is a
what
common.
it means? Do you know what being psychopath means?
I'm anybody who doesn't understand the situation and become extremely aggressive or reacts overreact in anything and takes the situation more intensely and can attack or do a criminal activity.
Okay. Okay, so let me start like this. The terms psychopathy and sociopathy, they're often used like together, but clinically they have some differences when it comes to the patterns, especially in emotional functioning and behavioral styles. When I talk about a psychopath, we have some characteristics. You should know that psychopathy is characterized by emotional detachment and calculated behavior. So we have this callousness, which means the lack of concerns for the other. Shallow affect, means limited emotional depth. Like they do not have this emotional thing for people. They lack of empathy as well. They cannot feel others' pain. And they also have this superficial charms. It means that when you see a psychopath, you cannot know that he is a psychopath because they are socially skilled. Like they charm people with their everything that they say, but at the same time they have this manipulative thing, like they use people in order to get what they want. And also, they have low fear response, which means that they don't care actually about the punishment or anything else. And when it comes to behavior, because of these traits, psychopaths, they tend to be more controlled and more strategic. So they plan their action, they have these calculated decisions, and they are able to function socially. And they can use instrumental aggression, which means that they are goal-oriented violence, like they know what they want. And most of the serial killers, they are actually psychopaths because they are planning everything, like they know what they are doing. From the forensic insight, as I said, they are more involved in more organized crimes. Do you know what is the difference between organized and disorganized crimes?
Organized means a perfectly planned, pre-planned, and fully proved according to criminals, a fully proved plan. But in case of unorganized crimes, it may be during a normal fight or during any intense conversation or aggressive conversation. Then it can be unorganized.
Very well said. So in organized crimes, the person know what they are doing. They have chosen like the victim. They cleaned the scene. They didn't leave any trace or evidence, and they have planned it. Whereas for unorganized ones, it happened like instantly. For example, two people were in fight and someone reacted, and this reaction caused the crime, and they leave this scene to be very chaotic. So what I'm saying here is that most of the organized crimes, when it comes to the offender, they can have some psychopath traits. And you should know that not all psychopaths are criminals, but high psychopathy increase actually the risk in forensic context. Now, when it comes to sociopathy, it is less clearly basically defined clinically, but is often used to describe individuals whose antisocial behavior is more influenced by the environment. For example, one of the key features is like having this antisocial behavior. They have this very high emotional reactivity. For example, when I just said the example of a two-person having a conflict and one has this high impulsivity and reacted, it can actually be something related to sociopathy, not psychopathy, because he has this high emotional reactivity and impulsivity at the same while, and they do not know how to regulate their emotions, okay? And the environment has a huge influence when it comes to, like, for example, trauma or upbringing as well. And if I want to talk about the behavioral style, I can say that unlike psychopaths, sociopaths, they are more reactive and they are less controlled. Okay, so we're talking about emotional outbursts, less planning. There are some difficulty maintaining some social roles. They cannot like be have this superficial charm that we talked about when it comes to psychopath as well. And when it comes to forensics, as I said, sociopathic individuals, they are more likely to engage in reactive violence rather than the planned violence, which is basically what a psychopath do. So if we want to briefly say, like, the main difference in here is the emotional regulation and the control. We're not talking about who is smarter and who does what. We're talking here that the difference is more about the emotional regulation and the control. The psychopath is cold, controlled, and more strategic. However, the sociopath is more reactive, impulsive, and unstable. And they fall under antisocial personality disorder. So if someone tells you like, oh, they have the antisocial personality disorders, these two, they fall under it at the same time. Okay? Before I move forward, maybe I can give you like a small example of both. A psychopath, for example, is, let's say we have an offender who planned the crime, he manipulated the victim, and during the crime, he showed no emotions, no empathy at all. So this is a psychopath. For example, we have another offender who gets angry, who acts impulsively. What I mean by impulsively is that he's not thinking of what he's doing, like he's just reacting or acting, and also committed like violence in the moment. So now we're talking about a sociopath. Now I'm gonna talk about the dark triad. Basically, the dark triad, it refers to three personality traits that are strongly associated with manipulation and in some cases antisocial or criminal behavior. And these three personality traits are narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. They are not diagnosed, okay, but they are personality dimensions that can appear in a varying degrees. I will explain what I mean by it right now. I'm gonna start first with narcissism. Okay, narcissism is characterized by this having this sense of self-importance and the need for admiration. Okay, and one of its characteristics are, as you can see here, grandiosity, entitlement, focus on the self. Okay, like they usually and frequently use I did that, I am like this, they also use the I, okay, and they see themselves very superior to the others. So they seek validation and attention. They are very sensitive to criticism. Like if someone tries to criticize them, they are very sensitive and they can actually sometimes maybe become violent because of it. And they can like do anything to maintain their self-image. In forensics, narcissism can contribute to offenses driven by the ego, the control, or maybe like if someone humiliated them and they're gonna react based on that. For example, if there's an aggression after feeling disrespected, if someone tries to disrespect them. When it comes to psychopathy, we just talked about it. We said that it's marked by emotional coldness, lack of empathy, and this shallow effect. And as characteristics, we said that they are emotionally cold, they are remorseless, and they lack of empathy. They have this reduced emotional expression. So they are more calculated and controlled. They appear socially normal, and they use the others without emotional attachment. In forensics, psychopathy is one of the strongest predictors of serious and repeated offending. And by that, I mean, of course, being a serial killer. It's associated with planned violence, manipulation, and the lack of remorse after the crime. Like they do not feel anything if they did a crime. So we're talking about, for example, an offender who plans to harm the others without like this emotional involvement. Now, the third personality trait in here is the Machiavellianism, which is basically refers to having this strategic, manipulative approach to social interaction. For example, no, allow me first to say the characteristics and then I give you an example. So they are manipulative, they are very self-interested, and they are dominating, and they have this strategic thinking and this controlling behavior. So basically, they have this long-term planning. They focus on personal gain. Okay, for example, when a person wants to get to a victim, okay, they saw this victim and they want to get to it. They want to convince this victim, okay, that they are, for example, that a good person, and in order to drag her, for example, and commit the crime, to assault or to kill or whatever the crime is. So this act of how they manipulate the victim is related to the Machiavellianism, okay? In forensics, these traits are often seen in crime that involve more like planning and deception. For example, when it comes to fraud, when it comes to strategic manipulations of the victims. So to sum up this slide, these three traits, they are often overlap and reinforce each other. For example, if each a person of these in front of you want to say one sentence, the narcissism can say, I deserve it. The psychopathy can say, I don't feel any guilt. And the third one can say, or the Machiavellianism, I know how to get it. If I want something, I know how to get it. Okay, so together they create a personality profile capable of manipulation, exploitation, and of course, the reduced moral inhibition. And what I mean by moral inhibition is that this characteristics of inhibition that a person can have this moral things that will stop him from hurting the others. And these moral things are actually gained from like the family, the environment, and everything that he was raised on. Okay. Now, as an example, okay, I gave you Ted Bundy. Do you people know or have ever heard of Ted Bundy before?
Yes, mom.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
Yes.
can you tell me what you guys know about this killer? There's also, a lot of documentaries about it, about this person, especially if you wanna see it. But let me tell you that he was an American serial killer, okay, in the 1970s, who kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered a lot of young women. He basically did that by using his charm and appearance to gain the victim trust. He manipulated them before committing the crime. And after that, he confessed to more than 30 murders and he was executed. So I don't want to talk about basically how the crimes happen. I want to see the characteristics of his behavior. So, his crimes were not really random. They were planned and they were calculated. He viewed his victims as objects rather than people. Okay, he was very manipulative and he wanted control and power, and he was driven, or I can say derived satisfaction from the act itself. So he had this pleasure from this act. And his aggression, it was not impulsive, it was very controlled. Now, how can I link it to that dark triad? When it comes to the first trait, the narcissism, he showed a very strong sense of superiority and control. He believed he was smarter than the others. He had a strong sense of this entitlement, and he needed to be or to feel powerful and dominant at the same time. The second one, the psychopathy, this is the most prominent trait in his case, because he lacked of empathy, there's no guilt or remorse, there's this emotional coldness, and this ability to harm the others without having this emotional reaction. And the third one from the dark triad is the Machiavellianism, which is basically he was highly strategic and manipulative because he carefully planned his crimes. He used deception in order to attract the victims, and he knew how to control the situations and the people. So Ted Bundy actually represents a very clear example of the dark triad in action. It's a combination of superiority, which is narcissism, lack of empathy, which is psychopathy, and manipulation, which is Machiavellianism. Now I'm going to talk about something called the criminal profiling. So criminal profiling basically is one of the most interesting parts of the forensic psychology. It is the process of analyzing a behavior in order to interfere characteristics of the unknown offender. Okay, it does not tell us exactly who the criminal is. Instead, it helps us narrow down the possibilities. For example, if we have a crime and investigators, they are suspecting around 100 person. Due to the criminal profiling done by the psychologist, this 100 can be narrowed into like 10. Okay, because we saw something on the crime scene behavior, like we saw, because this profile focused on the patterns, okay, the choices made by the offender and the consistency across the crimes. Okay, it looks like things, for example, how the crime was committed, the victim characteristics, who was targeted, and why this victim as well. And of course, like patterns across crimes, it means like where and when it happened. Okay, for example, if a crime occurs late at night, okay, in the same area, like let's say we had 5 crimes that occurred late at night in the same area, the profiler or the person doing the criminal profiling can suggest that the offender lives nearby. Okay, so criminal profiling is an investigative technique that attempts to infer like these behavioral, psychological, and characteristics, demographic characteristics of a very unknown offender based on the patterns that we observe in a crime scene. And as it's mentioned in here, it works best in serial or patterned crimes because it's more easier to build like this criminal profiling when it comes to a person committing a lot of crimes, especially that we have a pattern. Okay, and of course, it's used to guide the investigation. We cannot identify who the criminal was. Now, you should know that profiling is very probabilistic. It's not certain. It is supportive but not decisive. It means that it supports like in the investigation, but it's not based on it that we can decide who the offender is. Like they do not guide us directly to the offender, and it can never be admitted into. It's not an evidence in court. It means that it's not a legal evidence. Basically, it's an investigative aid. It only helps in the investigation. So it helps investigators to narrow possibilities, not to identify a suspect by the name. And of course, we have some types of the criminal profiling. We have the crime scene profiling, which basically we analyze how the crime was committed in order to know the behavioral traits. Okay, we should know like how this offender was thinking, why he did that, everything related to the crime scene. And then we have the geographical profiling, which is basically use the crime location in order to estimate where an offender may live or operate at the same time. And the digital profiling, which is a behavioral analysis, it's applied to online crimes or digital like crimes. Now, what do investigators look for in a criminal profiling? When investigators use criminal profiling, they do not focus on a single detail, okay? Instead, they look for a pattern of behavior across multiple crimes. The main idea is that behavior is not random. For example, an offender, they tend to repeat certain actions because this reflects some kind of a habit or some kind of a psychological need that they have. So first of all, how the crime was committed. We look at this. Investigators can examine how the crime was carried out, and this includes the level of control that this person had, the type of violence, and the method they used. From this details, they can determine whether the offender acted in an organized and a planned way or in a more impulsive and chaotic or unorganized way. They can also see the victim analysis, and by that they look also at the victim who was targeted. And this includes the age, the lifestyle, the location, and it also helps reveal the offender's motivation and how they gain access to this victim from the first place. It also talks about the location and the timing, which is a very important factor, where and when the crime occurred, because the location and the timing can reveal first, the offender's routine. Second, the familiarity of the offender with the area. For example, we can know that if this from the crimes done, if he lives nearby or maybe he lives in the same town, because the crimes are currently like occurring in the same place. We can also talk about evidence of planning versus impulsivity. What I mean by that is that they can also look for Planning versus impulsivity, which means that organized crimes, as we said, they are usually prepared, they're controlled, and the offender tend to hide the evidence. Whereas in impulsive crimes, it leaves chaos at the scene, lack of preparation, it wasn't planned, and it indicates that the offender was not in control. And also, the last thing is that the emotional, psychological, or symbolic elements. Profilers also, or the investigators, when it comes to this, they see the emotional elements of the crime. Like, some behaviors are not only about committing the crime. Okay, it's not about killing this person specifically. It reflects the emotional expression and psychological motives. Okay, like certain actions may symbolize something important to the offender. We know that there are some people, for example, who sexually assault women in some kind of way when they are unconscious or when they're after they're dead, because maybe they wanted to feel strong and powerful and dominant, because in their real life they do not feel like that. They feel very powerless. So when it comes to these crimes, when I look at it like that and I examine it like this, I don't really see it as, oh, he did that because he just wanted this. No, there's a motive behind it, like what the dark side of this, because he wanted to be a dominant and feel this power that he's not having in real life. So the key idea basically in here, guys, is that profiling do not identify a specific person. It can help the investigators to understand the behavior and the pattern, so they can basically narrow down the suspect pool and they move closer to identify the offender. Now, how this criminal profiling is conducted, or the process of it. So it's important to understand that this is not based on intuition or we're guessing in here. So in professional practice, it's a systematic analytical process, okay? So investigators, they collect the information from different sources and they interpret it carefully to understand the behavior behind the crime. The first step usually involves crime scene reconstruction. So the investigators, they try to understand exactly what happened at the scene, the sequence of actions, how the offender, for example, approached the victim, how control was established, and how the crime ended. And this actually helps to reveal the offender's decision-making and behavioral style. Next, we have the behavioral interpretation. At this stage, the investigators, they analyze what the offender's action might suggest about their personality. Sorry, not the investigators, I mean the criminal profiler, the one who's doing the profile. They analyze the offender's action that suggests more about their personality, their emotional state, their level of control. For example, if we have excessive violence, it can sometimes indicate strong emotional involvement, okay? Another important element is comparative case analysis, is that they compare the case with other known crimes to see whether there is some similar behavioral pattern that exists. And it also helps to determine whether the crimes may be connected or committed by the same offender. So criminal profiling is a collaborative process, okay? It usually requires the cooperation between different professionals. We have the investigators who gather the information and conduct the interviews. We have forensic scientists who analyze physical evidence. And we also have psychologists or behavioral experts who may help in interpreting behavioral patterns. So by combining these perspectives together, profiling can become more structured and can be used as an investigative tool rather than more just of a speculation or a guesswork. Is everything clear up till now?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So now I'm gonna give you some core elements of criminal profiling, which means the most important thing that we look for or we see in criminal profiling. First, we mentioned before the crime scene analysis. So basically, we examine the location, the method of approach to the victim, the level of control, the use of the force or the weapon. It helps us to determine if it was planned or impulsive, and the emotional state during the crime, the emotional state of the offender during the crime, because crime scenes, they reflect the behavioral decision, okay, of the offender. Second, we have the modus operandi. Modus operandi refers to how the crime was committed. It includes the tools and the weapons used, the method of entry or escape, the steps taken in order to avoid being detected, and it can actually change over time. For example, if we have the same offender who committed 5 crimes, the MO or modus operandi of the first crime is different from the fifth crime because he learned and he adapted to this. For example, he committed a lot of mistakes in the crime scene in the first one, but in the fifth one, there's a lot less because it is functional, it's not emotional, and he can learn and adapt more. Third, we have the signature behavior, which basically refers to behaviors that go beyond what is necessary in order to commit a crime. As we said, that we mentioned that they can have the psychological needs that they want to reflect, and they have this emotional gratification at the same time. So, and this actually is stable across all the crimes. It's different from the MO. The MO, we said that it can differ. However, the signature behavior is not because it's more psychological. The MO is more practical. So they have the same signature behavior across all the crimes because they have this emotional gratification and these psychological needs that they want to pursue and have. The fourth thing that we have is victimology. And by that, we study the victim's characteristics and lifestyle, the age, gender, the occupation, the risk exposure that they have in order to get to this victim. And it helps us answer why they chose this victim and why the victim, and was the victim targeted or it was like chosen randomly, you know? Because when we study this, it helps us to understand the offender choice. 5, we have the behavioral patterns, which is basically the repetition of actions across the crimes that he committed. It includes the time of the day, the location type. So basically the patterns, they increase more if you want to say it, like the reliability of profiling. Also, we have the geographical profiling. We mentioned it before that we analyze the location of the crime, and it's done in order to estimate where does the offender maybe live, the comfort zone of him, and it's more actually useful when it comes to serial killers. Okay. 7, we have the time analysis. So we examine when the crime occurred, the frequency of it, and the cooling off periods. And in here also we're talking about serial killers because when a serial killer commits a crime, we're talking about 3 plus crimes. There are always some time between each crime he commit. So we want to study this, like the frequency, the cooling off period of the crimes, which basically suggests the lifestyle or the stress or escalation phases. By escalation, I mean, for example, if you have a person, I'm going to give you a very simple example. If, let's say an offender enjoyed slapping someone on the face, he did that 5 times, and then the 6th time he killed him. So this is escalation. Like, for example, first time he slapped him once, the second he did it 2, the third, he did it 3 times, and after that, he killed him. This is the escalation process. And the escalation process gives more pleasure to the killer. And of course, it actually depends on the psychology of the killer or the offender as well. And last, we have the offender characteristics. And I need to tell you here right now that it's not diagnosed. We're talking about the characteristics that are inferred because we didn't diagnose the offender. We don't know who the offender is. So basically, it's probabilistic. They are probabilities. They are not labels. Okay, and we're talking here about the traits of that can show us the level of organization, the social functioning of this person. Okay, so it's very important to know that profiling do not diagnose mental disorder. It's all probabilities based on the crime scene, the MO, the signature, and everything we just covered. Okay, so is everything clear up till now? Guys, do you have any question? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay, so now I'm gonna talk about serial killers and mental illness. First thing, I need to tell you guys that there's a huge misunderstanding when it comes to serial killers because people think that they are psychotic or insane, or and by that I mean like they're not. People think that they are not aware of what they are doing. Okay, whereas it's actually totally like the opposite of that. Okay, they are not psychotic usually. Um, they do not they are not hallucinating, they are not really legally insane, and they are not detached from reality, because when it comes to serial killing, we are talking about planning, control, social masking. Whereas when I say that someone is psychotic, I'm talking about a person who doesn't know how to control, and they doesn't know what's right and wrong, and they have these hallucinations. So, who are basically serial killers? You know, it's typically defined as someone who commits multiple murders over time, with cooling off period between each time. Okay, each crime. Sorry. So this means that the killings, they are not done all at once, but they are like in separate events, often with like planning and repetition. So how do we actually identify serial killers? We identify them not just by the number of the victims, but by the patterns. You know, the investigators, they look for repeated behavior patterns, similar victim types, similar methods in the killing, for example. So it comes to patterns. So, and are they mentally ill? This is the most important question. Many people, they assume, as I said, that mental illness plus violence can equal to a serial killer. But the research, they show that it's something different, because most serial killers, they are not psychotic. They usually understand what they are doing. They know the right from the wrong. They are very aware of their action. So they do not meet the legal criteria of insanity. And what is more common, if I want to say, what we see more often is not severe mental illness, but we see personality pathology, and this includes psychopathy, antisocial traits, the lack of empathy, the need of control. So instead of losing touch with reality, many serial killers, they are actually very controlled and aware and intentional with everything that they do. And now, if I want to ask, like, what is the difference or what differentiates them from normal people? It's not that they are completely different type of a human. They are the same. It's that certain traits, they are more extreme. For example, sometimes any person can have a lack of empathy or this emotional detachment. But when it comes to these people, it's more extreme. Okay, they need for dominance. They have this abnormal rewarding process. For example, and by rewarding process, I mean that when they kill, they feel like it's rewarded. They feel this pleasure when they do that. So the difference, it's not the kind of person or the kind of people or the kind of the trait, it's the degree of it. How much do they have this lack of empathy, this emotional detachment, this need to pursue this pleasure? Now, if I want to say, or I want to talk about the common disorders among serial killers, I can tell you it's the personality disorders, more like antisocial, and sometimes they can be under substance use or drug use. There are so many very rare cases they can have psychosis. Psychosis means that they are not aware of the reality, and they see hallucinations and all of this stuff. And it's very, very, very rare. Now, when it comes to the types, here we're talking about the difference based on the motivation of each serial killer. For example, we have some that are after the power and thrill. So they kill for control, for excitement and dominance. Okay, so they enjoy the feeling of power over the victim. Sexually based, it means that the crime is linked to sexual gratification. Okay, the act of violence itself can become a part of sexual satisfaction. We have the psychosis, which we said that it's very rare, but in some cases it can be influenced by delusions or hallucinations. For example, some people, they believe that they are on a mission and they are commanded to kill. This kind of people. But again, this is not the majority. We have the financial gain. It's motivated by money or material benefit. For example, killing for the insurance or the inheritance or something like that. We have criminal enterprise, which means that killings, they are connected to, like, illegal operations or organized crime, something like the mafia and something like that. We have the anger. We can say anger and revenge because they have this driven by the rage and the perceived of injustice, things that can happen to him or her. We have the ideology, which is basically motivated by beliefs like political, religious, or extremist at the same time. So the main idea, you guys in here, is that serial killers, they're not usually driven by severe mental illness. They are more often driven by personality traits, learned behavior, and some psychological patterns. So instead of asking, are they crazy? We can ask, what psychological and behavioral factors led to this pattern of crime? And as also a serial killer, I have given you an example of Andrei Chikatilo. Basically, he was an Ukrainian-born Soviet serial killer. He was known as the Butcher of Rostov, or the Red Ripper. He committed at least 52 crimes and confessed to 56 murders in Russia and Ukraine and Uzbek at the same time. And he was primarily targeting children and young women. His crimes were characterized by extreme sexual sadism, rage, and mutilation at the same time. So after a long and complex investigation, he was arrested and executed by a gunshot in 1994. So it's very interesting how they actually got to get him. It's basically the police in there, they asked for a doctor, a psychologist, to help them. And he did actually some kind of a criminal profiling in order to know him. So if you guys are interested, you can read about this case. It's really interesting. But I'm going to talk right now about the psychology behind him. So from a psychological perspective, his case is often studied because it showed how many or how multiple factors they interacted rather than a single cause. One of the key factors was his early life environment, because he grew up in extreme poverty and there's exposure to war conditions and reports of trauma, okay? And this environment affected the emotional development and the attachment. Another important element was his psychosexual development, okay? He was reportedly experienced sexual dysfunction and humiliation in his early adulthood, and over time, his violent act become linked to sexual gratification, okay, which is a pattern seen in some sexually motivated serial killer. He also showed some behavioral escalation, which means that his crime become more frequent, they become more violent over the time. And this reflected the reinforcement process where the behavior become very stronger because it is performed repeatedly and it is associated with psychological satisfaction. And if I want to talk about his personality, he had some traits associated with psychopathy because he had the lack of empathy, manipulation, the ability to appear very normal in daily life. However, he was considered at the same time psychotic because he was not sorry he was not considered psychotic because he understood his action, and he like planned everything and how to avoid being detected. So this case highlight an important thing, which is that serial violent behavior is usually the result of interaction between the trauma, the personality traits, the sexual pathology, and opportunity. It's not a single factor. So it's really an important case that you guys can read about more and learn more about it. Now we're gonna talk about how forensic psychology can help our society. Well, guys, at the first of our session, we said that it's very important to include it when it comes to legal things and into the prison, because we're trying to help the people that are sick, for example, or help them to gain a better life when they came out of the prison. And we are like helping the society to not have more crimes, because we can never know that this person who's going to walk out from the prison one day, they're going to commit the crime another time, or what they're going to do. So we're trying to protect them, to protect the society, and to bring justice. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about today is the media versus the reality in forensic psychology. You know, it's essential to address how media and these kind of public things can shape the forensic psychology, because as us, our first exposure to forensic psychology, it comes from TV shows, movies, documentaries, and everything. So these productions, they are very engaging, okay, but they often distort the real role of forensic psychology. Because in movies and series, we see the forensic psychologists, they are often shown as they instantly understand the criminal mind, they create this precise profile that identify the offender, they work very independently, and they lead sometimes the investigation, and they solve the case very rapidly. Okay, and the profiling is usually presented as fast, highly accurate, it's central of the solving of the case, which it actually gives us the impression that, oh, psychology can alone solve the crimes, which is basically it's so false, and it's not true, because the reality of forensic psychology, in reality, it works very differently. It is a slow and cautious process. It relies on limited and incomplete information, because everything that a forensic psychologist rely on is gathered from the scene. And at any crime scene, we can have like some lack of information, some incomplete information. So it's not like it is not unlimited. It is limited, and it's always not. We cannot rely on it, and itself it cannot solve the crime. It is one part of a larger investigative process. And the conclusions, they're not decisive, they are probabilistic, as we said, they're not certain. So forensic psychologists, they do not lead the investigation, they do not identify the suspect, and they do not replace the evidence. Their role is to support understanding and not to provide the final answers. Okay? So in here, I have put a small comparison between what media shows and what actually happened. So we can see that in media, we see that they show us that they instant understand the criminal mind, whereas it's a gradual and cautious behavior analysis. In media, they tell us that, okay, one profiler, one forensic psychologist working alone can solve everything, whereas in reality, it's a team-based work. We have the police, we have the forensic unit, and we have the law. With the help of forensic psychology, we can get to solve the crime. In media, they show us that the profiles, they identify the offender, whereas in reality, it suggests only possibilities. We cannot ID anyone. Also, the media shows that psychology is the main solving tool, and it gives a fast result and clear answers. However, in reality, they only support the investigation. They cannot replace the police. They cannot replace the forensic unit or the law or anything. And it's also long and an uncertain investigative process. And lastly, they can show us, a forensic psychologist has this intuition, and they do not need evidence. However, in real life, what actually happens is that evidence and data, they guide the conclusion. Forensic psychologists, they can help in understanding more the behavior. So basically, guys, that was it. That was our session for today. I would like to ask if everything is clear. Do you guys have any question? Is there anything that you'd like to know more about?